Will Levis was tied for 25th out of 35 in expected points added, which, if you don't know what that stat is, I did a video on it. It is truly one of the best stats around for evaluating quarterbacks, and it can be even used for more as well. In addition to that, he was 33rd in quarterback rating. In his defense, though, his supporting cast rank was 23rd, which the supporting cast rank is developed through adding the PFF pass blocking and receiving grades together. So he definitely wasn't receiving help much last year, whereas he might this year. Overall, he ranked 29th out of 35 quarterbacks for me in year one, so definitely not the most inspiring, but reason enough to evaluate him further because simply not being the worst quarterback after being not selected in the first round and showing some real NFL talent with great arm and solid enough athleticism, that's something to monitor. Additionally, the backup quarterback for Tennessee is pretty solid, as Mason Rudolph has shown himself to be a competent quarterback that's more than capable of starting a few games. There were some people in Pittsburgh that wanted him back to be a starter, which I think Pittsburgh ended up doing way better than Mason Rudolph in that regard. I don't think Mason Rudolph should be a starter, but I do think he is a pretty fine backup. So I like his role here in Tennessee. The O-line for Tennessee is a bit of an issue. I usually use ESPN's pass block and run block win rates, but they had Tennessee's offensive line as 12th best in pass blocking, which doesn't match my eye test at all, nor does it seem in line with the talent evaluators I trust on YouTube as well. So instead, I'm using PFF's pass blocking grade, which ranked them as the 24th best unit, which seems about right. And they were 17th best in run block grade, which also seems pretty fair because they did appear better in run blocking than they were in pass protecting, but they weren't elite in either regard. Compared to last year, the line should be better, as they drafted J.C. Latham in the first to shore up their left tackle spot. It could be argued that they overdrafted him, but he was projected to be a first rounder nonetheless, and Bill Callahan has a great reputation as an offensive line coach. Since 2019, first-round pick tackles average a 64 PFF grade, which is much better than Jalen Duncan's 33 grade that he earned last year. They also brought in Lloyd Cushenberry, which is a little better than a lateral move from Aaron Brewer. Brewer is much worse in pass protecting, but a bit better in run blocking because he's so athletic. So Cushenberry should help with the development of Levis. Their depth is really solid, especially considering how good their line is overall. Sadiq Charles or Daniel Brunskill is a solid backup guard. Their tackle depth is also good if Dylan Radunes is their swing tackle. He is great as a run blocker and should start over Nicholas Petit Frere, in my opinion, because Petit Frere has really struggled in his pro career thus far. I think Radunes is the more qualified player, but what do I know? I'm just a YouTuber. Regarding their weapons, they're pretty solid. DeAndre Hopkins was 27th in yards per game and 28th in yards per reception, which is great consistency. You love it. He probably was doing that on purpose, trying to have the same exact stats, just a little bit off. Calvin Ridley was 31st in yards per game and 34th in yards per reception. More good consistency. You like to see that. It then falls off a bit with Tyler Boyd. Boyd was 71st in yards per game and 92nd in yards per reception. So he definitely is more of a chain mover than he is a deep threat. But it's honestly not that bad of a mingling of three receivers because Hopkins and Ridley are both really solid in the intermediate game and can be deep threats as well. Then Boyd is that consistent slot option that is going to be in the short game. So it's pretty good altogether. Chigo Okonkwo, one of the best names in the game, which has to count for something, ranked 20th in yards per game among tight ends and 21st in yards per reception among tight ends, which again, great consistency, albeit not so great standings of the stats. But About average. His athletic profile is much better than that, though, so he has a ton of potential still. Tony Pollard ranked 15th out of 59 halfbacks in PFF grade, so he's a nice plus as an electric runner. He's not the greatest receiving option, but he's pretty good in that regard, too. Depth-wise, Traylon Burks is a great wide receiver for being a putrid 148th in yards per game, but a solid 32nd in yards per reception. Nick Westbrook-Akina is a solid fifth wide receiver option as well as a slot option guy. And Tajay Spears ranked 18th out of 59 running backs. So they have a really good 1-2 punch at running back, and they have some solid options at receiver as well. I wouldn't be surprised if Burks doesn't get moved at some point because there just doesn't appear to be room for him, and he's still an intriguing prospect. I wouldn't be surprised if they don't get a late round pick for him, but who knows? He didn't have a great year, obviously, as evident by being 148th in yards per game this past season, so maybe the market is going to be dry, but he's still an interesting player nonetheless. At cornerback, the Titans are really strong. L'Jarius Sneed ranked 30th of 127 in PFF grade, and he does it the hard way, shadowing the number one receiver of the other team. So I think, if anything, he's better than that grade would suggest because, like I said, he is doing the hardest of assignments week in and week out. So that's going to make him appear worse than he actually is because he's not being matched up against, the number two basically at any point. And being in man coverage in any sense is a difficult assignment. Chidobe Awuzie was graded 72nd by PFF, but the year before ranked 33rd, which is more in line with what we can expect from him, in my opinion, as he's been a reliable cornerback for much of his career. He is just very solid. He can play man, he can play zone. He's done it in a complicated system with Cincinnati, and he's going to be doing it now in Tennessee, and I think he should be proficient all the same. In the slot, Roger McCreary is also really good. He was 34th in PFF grade. He's really good as a do-it-all slot guy. He can defend the run. He can play the pass. He's just a very good player overall. At safety, they are good and bad. Amani Hooker ranked 45th out of 95 safeties in PFF grade. So he's very solid. He's a little better than average. But then it falls off a cliff with Jamal Adams, aka Blitz Boy, ranking 88th out of all safeties. That's pretty rough. And that's been kind of par for the course for Adams for the past couple of years. It seems like he's kind of washed at this point. By kind of washed, I mean definitely washed. But there still remains some hope because he is still good as a blitzer. And he still can do some work around the line of scrimmage. It's just a deficiency in his coverage game as a whole. Regarding their defensive back depth, Eric Garrer, probably butchered that name, is a solid corner that can play outside or inside. And that's about it. They don't have much beyond them. So they need to stay healthy if they want to have any success in the defensive back realm. But if they are healthy, they should be pretty darn solid. Defensive line, the Titans are solid. Harold Landry finished tied for 41st out of 122 in edge pressures and is arguably better against the run than he is the pass. He also plays just about every rep, so he's pretty reliable in that sense and could be honestly a more polished player if he weren't out there for as long as he is, even though he has great endurance. He's not able to play at 100% on every snap because he just has to be out there for so long. Arden Key ranked 52nd for edge pressures. Tell me if this sounds familiar. He's also a solid run defender. That's arguably better in that regard than he is as a pass rusher. So the edge room, pretty solid, pretty similar in what they do. Jeffrey Simmons is a beast and finished 18th out of 142 in defensive interior pressures. He's also very solid against the run. Sebastian Joseph Day was 48th for defensive interior pressures and is a solid run defender as well. It just seems like I'm repeating myself over and over, but these guys genuinely are good at defending the run, and they have some proficiency as pass rushers as well. As for their depth on the defensive line, they have the excellent run defender Tavondre Sweat, who has some juice as a 360-pound pass rusher, which is a ridiculous statement. They drafted him in the second round this year. Historically, defensive tackles drafted in the second don't perform very well, ranking 87th out of 142 in grade, but he might be an exception because he already has an NFL-ready body. The linebacker core for Tennessee is likely going to be a weakness, but not overly so. Jack Gibbons was very solid last year, ranking 30th out of 82 linebackers in PFF grade. He's very strong against the run and solid in coverage, so their run defense is pretty good all around. Inversely, though, Kenneth Murray was 75th in PFF grade, being poor in run defense and coverage. So that's going to be one thing that could be an issue for them, is Murray is going to be somebody that will be targeted in the pass game and ran into in the run game. So Murray is definitely somebody to watch out for the Titans. He could be one issue for their defense that is pretty solid around him. The depth at linebacker for the Titans is Cedric Gray, who was drafted in the 4th. He isn't much of an athlete, and his play recognition will need to improve, but he is alright in a backup role, so they have something going for them. They could run 3 linebacker sets to defend the run, and if Murray goes down, I don't think there's going to be too much of a drop-off between Murray and Gray, so they at least have that going for them in the linebacker core. In all, the Titans are amidst a rebuild, but don't tell them that. They have good enough weapons to evaluate Will Levis now, but the O-line is likely going to remain poor even after investing their first-round pick in J.C. Latham. Defensively, there's a lot to like with them having a good defensive line and very solid cornerbacks, but Kenneth Murray and Jamal Adams are 2 clear weak spots that offenses will look to attack. Overall, their roster isn't quite fleshed out enough yet to really compete for anything, but they should have a better team than they did last year. And last year, they weren't a good team by any stretch, but they were competitive in a lot of games and had a never die type of spirit to them, which I think should still persist. And if anything, should be even greater because now they have more talent than they did last year. So they're a team to watch out for, even though they're not particularly good. Those are my thoughts on the Titans. Be sure to let me know what yours are in the comment section. And also be sure to like and subscribe for more NFL content.